Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on FNBO Business Insights in our conversation on all things cybersecurity, fraud, and ransomware. I'm Matt Meyer with FNBO's corporate banking team, and I'm joined today with a few panelists. And before we get into their introductions, I did want to let everyone know that throughout our conversation today, the attendees will have the option to type in questions through the chat function on Zoom, which we will pose to our panelists and experts towards the end of the conversation. So with that, let's jump into the introductions of our panelists today. So we'll start with Jeff Weeks. Jeff is a Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer here at FNBO. Jeff has been with FNBO for 21 years and is currently the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer. The executive leadership and oversight provided by Jeff in the development, management, and execution of information security for First National Bank of Omaha enables the company's ability to posture and protect private, personal information and assets of the company's clients, employees, and business partners. Jeff is a member of multiple industry organizations, including the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center and the Payments Processor Information Sharing, and is an FNBO board member. Over the course of his career, he has been awarded several professional certifications, including Certified Information Systems Security Professional. Also with us today is Cindy Mowry. Cindy is a director with Corporate Treasury Services at FNBO. As a payment specialist of Corporate Treasury Services, Cindy works with large corporate clients in a variety of industries with a focus in the healthcare and insurance verticals. She assists businesses with complex payables and receivable needs, devising solutions that simplify and secure their payment processes. Cindy joined the CTS team in 2011. Prior to taking on this role, she held positions in Treasury Services, business banking, and personal banking for a large financial institution. Cindy has over 24 years of experience in treasury management. And last but not least, Paul Bretson. Paul is a Senior Vice President at FNIC. Paul joined the Harry Coke Company, which is now FNIC, in 2002, with 15 years of underwriting and supervisor experience with an emphasis on property and workers' compensation coverage for national accounts. He specializes in commercial property casualty insurance for manufacturing, financial services, aviation, and healthcare, with an emphasis on property, professional liability, captive insurance programs, and workers' compensation. Paul leads FNIC's cyber team as the primary resource on business disruption and financial costs related to the recovery from a cyber event. He stays abreast of coverage options and loss trends. And so with that, we'll go ahead and dive right into today's content and questions for our panelists. So Jeff, for a layman like myself, a lot of terms like cybersecurity, cybercrime, cyber fraud, ransomware, all somewhat get used interchangeably. Could you help us provide some definitions around some of these terms that we hear so often?
You bet. Thanks, Matt, for having me, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, there's a lot of different definitions for all things cyber, but it really boils down to cyber is really protecting your company's data assets, your customers' data, their assets. It's really putting a program in place overall to handle the people, process, technology around cybersecurity. There's some basic cyber. We have the technology piece to protect us from the hackers. Then you have the multifactor, which is a big piece going on now. And just a definition of multifactor is really it's two forms of authentication when you log on to a website. Something you know, which is a password, and then something you have, which is a kind of a code that can be text to your cell phone or your iPad or your email address. So that's two layers of authentication for multifactor. Then we've got the cyber fraud, which goes in there, and I kind of break that down into some categories. We've got really consumer fraud, which is really account takeover. Somebody's taken over their account and is logging in as the consumer. We've got commercial, which is account takeover as well. It could be fraudulent wires and ACH. Both of them have credit card fraud associated with them. And the last one, the big one, I think it's the buzzword going around everywhere today is the ransomware. I think it's the number one attack going on in the world right now. And in a nutshell, ransomware is really where a bad actor has actually infiltrated your network and encrypted your data in your systems. And then they're actually demanding a ransom that you pay to actually get the key to unencrypt all your data and resources.
Great, thanks for that. Paul and Jeff, maybe I'll pose this one to both of you. Talk a little bit about how you've seen fraud evolve over your respective careers. In particular, the prevalence of cyber fraud as we transitioned into this digital age, coupled with, the last 18 months of just growing remote access for employees and remote working conditions. So Paul, let's maybe start with you and then we'll kick to Jeff.
Sure. Cyber fraud from our standpoint has been with us for a very long time. Think about the old Prince of Nigeria, the royalties emails that you would get. And the difference is the sophistication of those emails has gotten much, much better. And the criminals have gotten a lot smarter. Thinking about cyber insurance, I often compare the development of cyber insurance to employment practices liability, which is discrimination, wrongful termination. And then when that coverage first came out in the 1990s, I would get clients look at me like, well, why would I buy that? And today, literally everybody buys employment practices liability. I see the same trends right now with cyber. I'm also now seeing employers carrying much higher cyber limits. Previously, $1 million was kind of the norm, but now we're seeing 5 million for mid-sized businesses, 10 million for large businesses. As Jeff kind of talked about, ransomware now is 75% of all claims, and the average ransom demand in 2021 is $1.2 million. So actually, lower limits are becoming much more inadequate to even address a typical claim. I will say I usually tell my clients there are 3 areas to overbuy insurance. One of them is business interruption, loss of income. The second is your umbrella coverages. And the third is now cyber. As I kind of mentioned, the criminals are getting a lot smarter. And, this all used to start out as, getting personal information. And a lot of employers would say, well, the only thing I have is my payroll records. But again, the malware is becoming so much more prevalent and the attacks are becoming more sophisticated, moving even away from just the basic computer system, but moving into production equipment, moving into HVAC systems, and then just kind of finally fraud. We've seen fraud increase just because of the whole work from home atmosphere due to the pandemic. You have employees on laptops, employees are not in the office to kind of confirm or whether that this is a real attack or a real email. So again, we just see things ratcheting up and the criminals are taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'll get to you in just one second because I'm interested in your perspective here. But Paul, just a quick follow on to that. You mentioned, over insuring around some of these things. What is the availability in the market today for trying to insure against some of these cyber risks? And do the carriers still have an appetite for those sorts of policies?
There is still plenty of capacity in the marketplace. Prices have gone up significantly, 40, 50, 100% for standard risk. If you've had a cyber claim, it may be 200%. What we're actually finding in the marketplace is even with those increases, claims are actually increasing 70, 80%. So the premium increases are actually still not keeping up with the loss trends in cyber insurance.
Got it. And Jeff, so back to you. Over the duration of your career, how have you seen this trend in fraud kind of changing over that time?
Yeah, way back when cyber was actually starting up and all that, it was everybody's mentality was, build a wall around my company, keep the bad guys out. That's how it started. Now they're very well educated. They're very well funded now. We have a lot of different channels that they try to infiltrate. It's kind of changed. We still work on building the wall to keep the bad guys out, but we've now changed our focus in the last 5-7 years. Is now we put a large amount of emphasis on making sure if they get in, they can't get back out with the data they came in for. So we call it data loss prevention. So, we monitor all of our outbound traffic for Social Security numbers, credit card numbers, just to make sure in the event a bad guy does get in, they can't get back out. With the remote work from home, that's given the hackers a whole new channel to try and get into the bank. It's very difficult for cybersecurity people with the remote from home, because now you've got people's home PCs that are connecting into your network, and you have no visibility into their PC, and you can't, really mandate security standards on that PC. So that's a big vulnerability with the remote workforce right now.
Yeah. I mean, just the average employee, the number of devices that might be connected into a company's systems, right? I mean, I think about me personally, between cell phone, tablet, laptop, home PC, office PC, there's 5 devices that have, varying degrees of access to a company's system. So are there certain conditions that you feel in your mind make an organization perhaps more susceptible to cyber fraud or ransomware?
I do. I think, one thing to keep in mind is your program and your posture is only as strong as your weakest link. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is, sometimes the weakest link can just be the people themselves, not the technology, not the policies you put in place, but the actual people. And an example of that is phishing. Phishing is a huge attack vector right now. And, you need to train your people on phishing, send them phishing tests, get them aware of what a phishing email looks like, because, one click on a phishing link in an email could bypass millions of dollars worth of cybersecurity technology. So I would really, don't put all your eggs in one basket on, hey, I need the latest and greatest technology to protect me. You need to also look at your people and process as well.
Yeah. So we've gone through a little bit of the overview of some of these terms and the buzzwords that we hear. Cindy, a lot of the work that you and I do for our customers and clients is around prevention of fraud. Knowing that there's a wide variety of attendees on today's call, what are some suggestions you have for businesses, both big and small, around organizing around cybersecurity and some prevention tools that you've seen put in place?
Sure, Matt. First of all, I might add that Jeff has now scared me from clicking on any emails going forward, but that's okay. I'm sure I'll be able to do my job effectively going forward.
That's his job.
I know, and I'll be more careful, I'm sure. So, Matt, no matter what the size of the business is, I think Jeff had said this earlier. He used the words have a program. In my, what I always say to my customers is, no matter what your size is, have a plan around how you're protecting your business data and your financial information. So what I'm always talking to customers about when we're doing reviews of their accounts, it's ongoing, and it's always be suspicious of anyone who is trying to get a wire through very quick or making you change from your normal process. And when I'm saying anyone, I mean an executive at your company. Like, this isn't just, they're not focusing on, a customer service rep or maybe an AP rep or AR rep. I mean, it could be anybody that the fraudsters are focused on. So make sure if someone's telling you to rush through something, you take a step back and make sure you're always following your plan that's in place around processing payments. And then confirming wire ACH transactions with a trusted and verified source via phone versus via email. And we'll talk about an example of why that's important here shortly. Dual controls, dual approvals, ACH wire alerts that are available from the bank. These all sound like simple things, but it's not always thought about. Like, what are we doing on every one of our accounts? Are we making sure we either have check block or ACH blocks, making sure that if there's no checks written, we want to be sure that nobody has a routing number, an account number, and can create a fraudulent check or run through an ACH item, as well as having check or ACH positive pay. These are all things that we have available through the bank, and it's important that you're reviewing every account you have and making sure from a fraud prevention standpoint that you have the appropriate services set up. And then also, a lot of the statistics from AFP say that our clients are mitigating that risk by reconciling more frequently than they maybe have in the past, and making sure they're looking at activity daily. And that could be not only looking at your CMO, cash management online, or online banking, but also a lot of our customers are getting direct feeds through like BAI files directly into their systems, and their systems are doing the reconciliation for them. So it's a variety of different things that companies are doing right now.
Yeah.
So Matt, if I can interrupt real quick, a true case study, and just the sophistication of the criminals, is we had a client and they were being targeted literally for 6 months by a group out of Asia, and they had set up the payment structure and everything, and they were working with a person named Danny, and our guy was a little suspicious. He wanted to speak to Danny. They brought Danny aboard, and he started talking to Danny, and Danny was telling him all the things he knew about him. And the only way they tripped up the scam was that the Danny that my person dealt with was a female, and they brought Danny as a male. So again, the sophistication of the criminals and the amount of time they will spend is often impressive.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we've consistently seen is that when you begin doing some forensics around an event and you understand how it came to pass, there's typically a monitoring period that can be, anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to your point, 6 months, where they're watching to understand the cadence of conversations when folks are trying to release funds, or what internal processes take place to get funds out the door, how folks respond to email. They're essentially building that and then watching calendars and sent email to know when folks are in or out of the office to find that opportune time to take advantage. And so as we think about new technology, innovation, every company's, becoming more digital. It feels every CEO probably feels like they're almost managing a technology company these days as much as what the subject matter of their actual business is. Paul, I'll pose this one to you. When it comes to innovation and new technology, what are maybe some considerations on the front end that companies should keep in mind as they're implementing new technologies?
First off, as Jeff kind of mentioned, MFA, a multi-factor authentication, is becoming almost an absolute to even obtain any coverage. Same thing with segregated backups of data. The pricing difference right now between a non-MFA and an MFA insured risk is probably 50 to 100% difference in pricing. And a lot of that is, we've talked about how the market has tightened. Capacity, there's a lot of players, but capacity itself, the underwriters are less inclined to use their full capacity. So for instance, we had a large client that had a significant limit with one carrier. When we renewed it at a 50% premium increase, and it was spread over 3 carriers. So again, you're just really starting to see the underwriting become tighter. Underwriters are wanting a lot more information, and they're really looking at this stuff to where it used to be some of the applications was a page. What's your revenue? How many employees you have? Here's your quote. And those days are long gone.
Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts on this topic in particular? And maybe how does FNBO approach, or what sort of considerations do we keep in mind as we're implementing new technologies to better our customers' experience?
Yeah, in this day and age, everything is connected to the internet. I mean, you cannot go out and buy a refrigerator or a thermostat for your house without the option of being connected to the internet. It's easy to use, it's customer friendly, but the one thing to keep in mind is now you're creating a potential channel for the bad actors to get into those devices. So, just really need to put security at the forefront. I mean, just simple things like, a refrigerator. They have the smart fridges now where you can go out and, you can configure your fridge to say, if I get below a gallon of milk in my fridge, automatically order it for me and have it delivered to my house. Well, the one thing to keep in mind, how does your fridge pay for that? You have a credit card that you've put into your fridge. And if you don't secure the user ID and password logging into your fridge, you've just given your credit card or potentially given your credit card to a bad actor. So it's really just keep, my methodology is always keep in mind that somebody may always be looking at what you're doing on the internet. So how do you keep them from looking? Make sure you change your default password when you're buying anything off the internet, a fridge, a TV, an Xbox, a thermostat, light bulbs, all of that. They all come default with password as the password. Now the industry's trying to change that, but it's important that everybody knows that first thing they should do when they hook up something internet accessible, we call it the Internet of Things, IoT. First thing you should do is go in there and change that password to something you know.
Got it. Cindy, we've talked through a couple of kind of anecdotal examples here, but so much of the payment fraud that we see on the banking side is fraudsters posing as vendors in an attempt to change payment instructions to a fraudulent account. What should businesses consider when setting up new vendors for payment and making payment changes for existing vendors?
Sure, Matt. I have some clients I have talked to specifically about this to get some best practices to share with other clients who have ongoing concerns about what we can do. And it's always the best defense for the vendor payment protection is a well-educated and alert staff that talks often about security awareness. So always having discussions about how are we protecting our information when a vendor contacts us, what are we doing? What is our plan around vendor changes? And it's never one and done because the sophistication is changing all the time. And I have customers who have employees who are dedicated to all vendor ads, updates, changes with built-in due diligence, which includes an email in from, if a vendor emails in a request to change on their document, they will actually say, we won't take this document, you have to fill out our own document after they have called. So a phone call versus an email to the vendor who needs to make a change. They have their verified vendor source, call them and say, will you fill out our form? So they're not taking any chances that someone has infiltrated an email and taken the information and sending it to a different routing number and account number. So basically, you're in control of your vendor changes rather than the vendor being in control of those changes.
Got it. So as we think about establishing those protocols for future payments, what part do you think the conversion and transition to digital payments plays in preventing fraud?
Well, interesting enough, I mean, I think digital payments are they're here to stay, but they're opening up more fraud opportunities and vulnerability points for companies. And so when we talked before about having educated staff, the key again is on every level of staff. No one is immune from being targeted in your company. And as an example of that, I'm sure many of you have heard of business email compromise, or BEC. That seems to be one of the big hits we're having recently with companies. And an example of one that happened, just so we want to give you an idea of the uniqueness of what is happening and the sophistication of what the fraudsters are doing right now is, I would start with a question: what would you do if someone hacked into your email and your instant messaging account? Would you know that it happened? And for the customer we're working with, the client didn't know until it was too late, which is very unfortunate and scary, but it's something for our clients to keep in mind. So it was a perfect storm for this company where they had employees out ill. They had employees who were out because of the pandemic changes in their state, and they had employees and management in multiple states. And what happened was a wire request comes in from an internal hacked email to pay a vendor via wire. And the routing number and account number is changed on that wire request. So when it came into First National Bank, we noticed that it was an existing vendor that they've paid, but the routing number and account number was different. So we called our customer and said, hey, is this legitimately the correct vendor with the correct routing number and account number? And they said, let me do some research. And they emailed their employees, and multiple employees were emailed, but what they didn't know is those employees were hacked. And the hacker was responding, yes, this is valid information. We're good to go. Send the wire. And nobody knew that the information was hacked. So the wire was released. So that's just an example of what can happen. I mean, for this company, forensic research showed that the hacker most likely had been in, like Paul had said, for a matter of weeks, kind of studying what was going on with the company, watching emails going back and forth. So they're very smart, sophisticated. They just don't go in today and try to do something. I mean, they are waiting for the opportune moment to take advantage of our companies. So the key to this was, instead of verifying with the vendor or with an employee via email, reach out to that vendor via phone, go through your protocol there for vendor protocol changes. And then also, it sounds somewhat archaic, but if you can't walk over to an employee and say, hey, did you know that this information was changed? Or did you say you needed to send this email? Literally pick up the phone and call them. And that would have made all the difference in this scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paul or Jeff mentioned earlier, sometimes, I mean, the simplest forms of security are the most effective. And to your point, remote working environments and the prevalence of that today, coupled with, folks, again, kind of being somewhat displaced as we see COVID cases rising, it just creates an environment that's ultimately more susceptible to that sort of activity and shortcomings in terms of verification with a human being. Paul, I'll pose this next question to you. As we've talked through, the risks that can obviously come with some sort of cyber event occurring, could you talk through some of the options that exist to ensure against these risks? And then also maybe just, let the attendees know what sort of limitations or things they should know about these policies going into them.
Thanks, Matt. So first off, I mean, with any insurance, you can retain it, i.e. pay for it yourself. You can transfer it to another party, or you can insure it. I will say that I won't spend much time on the first two, but if you do elect to transfer it to another party, you still might need cyber insurance because you still may have liability for the information that the hacker gets. So again, just remember that transfer itself doesn't absolve you of any responsibility. The key really with cyber insurance is not all policies are the same. Some carriers will have low limits, sublimits, and limited perils. I mean, the comment that we will make is it's better than nothing, but it's pretty darn close. I mean, we would recommend that you go to an insurance company that specializes in cyber and really look for a robust program. And in there, you're going to have, the true cyber liability, the security liability for the event, cover the breach costs, legal, notification, forensics, those sorts of things. Any fines, GDPR, the European system, California. Cyber policies now can add loss of income due to the cyber breach, reputational harm, kind of that crisis management piece. Look for data recovery, the ability to put that data back together, and also look for something we call bricking. And it seems pretty obvious that if a hacker gets in and just destroys a piece of equipment, it's the equivalent of a brick. So therefore, insurance, you can actually have insurance to replace that equipment, because it would be cheaper to replace the equipment than it would be to repair it. Cyber extortion is key. That's the coverage for the malware, for the phishing piece of it. Media liability that protects your website. If you take credit cards, there's the whole payment card industry, PCI coverage. So again, really just recommend a robust, complete program. And really, again, as I mentioned before, look at your limits. $1 million is a start, but it definitely can become inadequate going long term. The other piece of this is I would also recommend that you make sure social engineering coverage, telephone fraud. Social engineering is when you get that request to send money to somebody and you do it, and it's not necessarily due to malware, it's just you get the email and you respond to it and send the money. So again, I just really want to emphasize the importance of using a reputable cyber carrier and really looking at your limits, overbuy versus underbuy.
Very good. So we've talked a little bit about trying to prevent cyber fraud from occurring, trying to prevent malware, ransomware, some options to insure against the risks that are inherent in the economy that we all work in today. But let's talk about, in the event that malware is brought into a company system, that there is a ransomware attack that a company becomes aware of. Jeff, I'll open this up to you. What are some steps that a company should take in the event that it occurs?
Yeah, the first thing you should do is if you detect malware or any anomaly on your network coming from a PC or something like that, you should cease all activity from that computer immediately and remove it from your network. That will help with the spread of the malicious code. Depending on what you detect, there are your own capabilities in your company. You may enlist the help of a cyber professional, a third party, to come in and run forensics on that PC to find out exactly, the who, what, when, and why it happened. It's just really some basic, change passwords on any accounts that you believe were compromised. Contact all your financial institutions. Let them know that you had a compromise. That way it'll put them on a higher level of alert as well. You heard Cindy talk about the email compromise that we've gone through at First National Bank. You need to go back and remember that's the entry point that they started that whole breach, was they compromised the email. So the most important thing I can say out there is the use of multi-factor. If you're using Office 365 or somebody else is hosting your email, or you're connecting to a financial institution or somebody you're doing transactions with, multi-factor is critical to that point. Because I can tell you, there's so many, I hate to say it this way, but there's so many low-hanging fruit companies out there that don't have proper security postures, that if the bad guys detect you have multi-factor enabled, there's a great chance they're going to move on and find somebody else that doesn't. So it's really just, if you can lock the door and they see it's locked, they're not going to spend a lot of time trying to compromise you. So it's really on the front end. If you can keep them out right away, that's going to help you in the long run.
Yeah. Well, and I think, unfortunately, as we've probably all seen in our careers, when a loss does occur, there shouldn't, necessarily be an expectation that there's a recovery either. Especially in the case of funds that have been wired out. Those are good funds. If an account is cleaned out that those funds landed in, there's no guarantee that there can be any recovery. We obviously do our best to work with partner banks where funds have landed to try and recover what we can, but there's never any guarantee that it'll be successful.
You are correct. It really depends on, as Paul was saying earlier, these guys are very patient. I mean, they will spend months, if not years, doing their homework to make it, for the big bang effect is what I'm calling it. But yeah, it all depends on time and the attack. But you're correct. There is no guarantee there will be any recovery of the funds.
So Paul, in the case of an event occurring and someone wasn't sure, what steps should they take following them becoming aware of an attack?
I think the first thing, and this predates the attack, is to have a breach plan in place before the breach even happens. Know who to call. Invariably, these events happen on a Sunday morning. The email shows up that your system is locked down and now you don't know what to do. Who do you call on an after hours emergency standpoint? Know who those folks are. Make sure that you're working with when the event happens, call your breach coach, which basically is within your policy, and it's to ensure attorney-client privileges for anything that's going forward. But the key is to submit the claim as quickly as possible. Cooperate with the claim handlers. We've had clients that have had a major breach and they become almost embarrassed, and then they clam up and don't really want to share anything, which actually impedes the claim process. The other part of that is, as Jeff kind of talked about, time can be extremely important to prevent infection of significant parts of the network. So create a culture where if someone clicks on something, they feel like they can go immediately to somebody and say, I think I made a mistake, and just allow that to work through the process. But again, the claim handlers in these cases, I don't want to say are your friends, but they are on your side, and work with them.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt, that's very important that Paul just mentioned there is, we have hundreds of breaches happening around the world on a daily basis. So a lot of people are getting numb to the breach. It's not really, people are not being judged anymore that they were breached. They're being judged on how they handled the breach. And I can tell you the last thing you want to be doing in the middle of a breach is designing your incident response plan at the same time. So I think it's critical, as Paul said, to do your incident response plan now. Get it done before you actually need it. Run some tabletops, learn some lessons from it, because you won't have time in the middle of a breach to be changing or implementing the incident response plan.
Yeah, great advice. Well, with that, let's jump into some of the questions that have been posed by the attendees today. And actually, I'm gonna maybe have Jeff. I'm gonna have you jump back. In one of your comments, you had mentioned a concept of segregated backups. Could you expand on that and just kind of fill the audience in on what that actually means?
You bet. Segregated backup is really a backup that you have away from the rest of your network. So I think that the cyber term out there is called air gapped. What it is you think about ransomware. That code gets on your network and spreads really quickly to encrypt everything in its path. So if you do a backup and you actually have the backup connected to your internal network where the ransomware is spreading, it will spread to that backup as well. And that your now backup data will be part of the ransomware. So the segregated data backup is really protect it away from the rest of your network. So in the event you do have a ransomware and it starts encrypting or spreading a virus, it can't get to your backup data. Now, I know that's kind of weird because it seems like we're coming full circle and going back to the days of, tape backups. We used to do tape backups and then take them off site. We're back to that now. People are now looking at, hey, the best way to protect from ransomware and without paying the ransom is get your data backups off your network. That way you can restore from clean data.
Yeah. And Jeff, just looking at these questions, it appears you're very popular with our attendees. So I'm gonna fire away on these, and Cindy and Paul, feel free to chime in as well. One of the first questions was I've been asking for an always-on app-based 2FA or I suppose multi-factor authentication from FNBO. And it says they're a little bit surprised that perhaps the banking industry seems to have lower online security standards than other sites. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit, Jeff?
You bet. That kind of tells me our methodology is kind of working for our customers because we do have always on app-based multi-factor. It is always on. I think our customers don't realize that because of some configuration that we've done on our multi-factor. So what it is when you log in for the first time, we send a code to your email address or your cell phone or your iPad, whatever you configure, to guarantee it is you coming from that device. Then we actually send a cookie to that device to authorize that device to connect to First National. We then set a time frame that 30 days. I may be off a few days on the amount of time, but what that means is if somebody tries to log on to First National Bank from that authorized device and has the correct user ID and password, all the multi-factor is taking place in the background. So we've replaced that code with that secure cookie coming from that device. So they won't have to, they won't get a code sent to them again. Now, if they move to another device that hasn't been authenticated, they go to their iPad to do online banking, they're going to notice they get that code because that is not an authorized secure device that we've validated. Now, some people, myself included, when I do online banking, I want my code every time. I don't want you to, look at the secure token and just grant it. And if you want it every time, all you need to do is go into your browser and make sure to delete cookies for the First National Bank site when you exit your browser. So there you're removing that security token we've placed on your device. So the next time you connect, we won't see the security token and it'll send you with the prompt for multi-factor. That's, there's a lot of this stuff that goes on. I think that's a myth out in the industry, is that the financial institutions are less secure. I would argue that we are probably the most secure, given that we've been doing it the longest. We're regulated by the most people, agencies around that. We've just gotten really good at it with not really impacting our customers where they don't need it. There's things that go on in the background for multi-factor that customers don't see. And a good example is, if customer A logs in from Omaha at 10 a.m. in the morning for online banking, and then we get another request for that account to log in from Atlanta 30 minutes later, our system knows there's no way that user's getting from from Omaha to Atlanta in 30 minutes. So that would block. The multi-factor systems build profiles for users. It's kind of, hey, this user logs in from this device all the time, and if it sees a new device, then it triggers some fraud on our end or a higher level of scrutiny. So there is a lot around multi-factor that goes on in the background that our customers don't see.
Got it. Yeah, great information. Thanks, Jeff. Paul, I'll pose this next one to you. We have an attendee that's interested in the underwriting process for cyber insurance. What should a company have prepared to demonstrate in order to obtain the lowest possible rates for cyber insurance?
I will tell you that the applications that are provided to you to complete are very thorough and really are the best source of information for that underwriter. Oftentimes they'll ask for explanations to certain questions. And again, the recommendation would be to be very thorough in those answers as to what you have and what you don't have. Oftentimes, either you'll surrender the application completely to the IT department, which definitely has its value because those are the guys who know what you have, but make sure as the person signing the application, that you also understand what you're signing.
Got it. And kind of a follow-on to that, this is a bit of a anecdotal example. It appears that, this says, if a company has a 10+ year history, security measures in place, no history of past breaches. Are all those things playing into the decisioning process by these carriers of cyber policies?
Absolutely. But again, I think the key is, as kind of Jeff has talked about, as controls and things evolve, making sure that your organization continues to grow and maintain new technology and, you know, MFA, those sorts of things. Don't rest on your laurels.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I guess, Paul, this is a great opportunity for you. We just had another follow-on question to that says, where can we purchase cyber insurance?
Log on to FNIC. We'd be glad to talk to you.
We'll send you Paul's email information. So that's great.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, a few more that have come in. Curious if you can touch on the handling or the approach to third and fourth party ransomware events. Jeff, I'll let you respond to that one, and maybe even include, how does FNBO evaluate our third parties and their susceptibility to cyber events or issues?
You bet. Yeah, that's a tricky situation. I can tell you at First National Bank, most of my time around ransomware is spent with third parties or fourth parties that are victims. So it really boils down to is you need to do your due diligence, proper due diligence up front. If they're going to have your data or your customer data, you need to actually do the homework and make sure they have a proper security posture in place. And at First National, what we do is we will send them questionnaires. We will go out and do third-party searches on the internet around their security posture. And, you know, part of the thing we require is we need a third-party attestation from these third parties and fourth parties, you know, maybe a PCI certification or a SOC 2, which is a third-party security audit that actually validates they're at a certain level of security before we even approve them as a third or a fourth party to get our customer data. So it's really around, you know, just making sure your data is going to be safe at their location at the best you can. Because, you know, there is no silver bullet out there. But again, it goes back to what I talked about. You want to make sure that third or fourth party is not part of the low-hanging fruit group out there that doesn't have a good lock on their front door when the bad guys come calling.
Yep. So earlier we kind of asked a clarifying question around segregated backups. One of the folks attending today is curious if shadow backups are vulnerable to ransomware.
Well, again, it really boils down to where your backup is. If you're shadowing a backup across your network to some other platform, then there's a good chance it's susceptible to the same encryption malware. If it's got a path across the network to get to it, it's vulnerable. Now, there are things, you know, if you're doing a shadow backup to a database that's built to protect you from ransomware, which means it may be, you know, read only once the data's there. It may have a administrator password that's required to do the backup. Then you're protected from that. But it's really, it boils down to, think about it. If there's a path from your internal network to a backup, whether it's a shadow backup, a segmented backup, any type of backup, it's vulnerable to it. So now you got to look at different layers of protecting that backup.
Got it. And I'm not sure who might be best to answer this, but there's also a question around phone communication. We've talked about the importance of reaching out to verify, you know, a change in payment instructions or a new payment request, or anytime money's moving to a verified contact. Should there be concerns or thoughts around a phone call possibly being compromised in some way?
I would tell you that the most out of the options we have with email and phone, and you want to use phone. Because if you think back to what we talked about earlier, if you're using an email for your code, usually that email is housed on your PC. Or, you know, if somebody compromises your PC, now they have access to your email. So they could actually request a code on your behalf when they log in. And that code is going to actually go to your email address, which if they have control of your PC, they're going to have access to. So now we've given them the something you have and sent the code to the hacker. So I would say the best thing to use, in my opinion, is the actual phone, the cellular network. You want an SMS or even a phone call to your phone giving you the code, because the chance of a hacker actually getting your phone or your iPad is a lot slimmer than taking over control of your PC where your email is. So that boils right into what I tell people when, to protect yourselves when you're on the internet, is if you're out and about, like in an airport or a coffee shop or someplace not where there's a secure Wi-Fi, and you need to log on to anything, you got to put a user ID and a password into a website from your iPad or your iPhone at an airport. You don't know who's listening. You don't know if that Wi-Fi is secure. So turn off the Wi-Fi on your device and use the cellular network when you're sending user IDs and passwords. That will help you keep the bad guy from seeing what you're doing. So yes, I know, long story short, cellular is probably the best route to go when you're using multi-factor.
Yeah, and Cindy, maybe a good time to reiterate some of your comments earlier on steps to take in having phone numbers with contacts that are at a verified number, right? Not just responding or calling back a phone number that might be on an email and a signature block requesting payment, but having a verified number on file for vendors or anyone else that you might be remitting payments to.
Right. It's a simple thing. You get a notification from a vendor potentially that says update our information. And so they might have a phone number on that form they send you. But instead of calling that phone number, call the verified phone number you have updated in your own system or your verified vendor contact. So just making sure you're not taking information that was sent by potentially the fraudster and calling that same person back. I mean, we've heard that happening. I think people are doing a lot better job in not just taking that information at word and just, oh yeah, no problem, I called that number, they said everything was fine. I think customers are getting a lot better at knowing they need to call back a verified source.
Yeah, and one more question that came in, and we'll make this the last one before we wrap up for the day, but are one-time password authenticator apps more secure than SMS?
I would say they're right up there with SMS. You're, kind of like a Google authenticator or, an Okta authenticator like that are right up there with the SMS. It's going to be, you load that app on your device, either your cell phone or your iPad. You may not want to load it on your PC, again, because you think about if they take the PC and they take control of your PC, they're going to have access to everything on the PC. But if you're going to put a Google authenticator on your iPad or your cell phone, then it is, in my opinion, it is just as secure at the same level as SMS, because now it's going to that device that the hacker over in China and Russia is not going to have access to, like he could with your PC from China or Russia.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And as I mentioned, we'll kind of wrap there for today. I did want to mention we had some folks asking through chat. This is being recorded. We'll archive it actually on the FNBO Business Insights webpage, and it will be available for folks to view and share later on. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending today, for listening in. I especially want to thank our panelists for joining us. I thought it was a really good conversation with some practical steps for folks to think about and perhaps implement in their organizations. And if you have questions, reach out to the folks at FNBO, at FNIC. If you need contact information, we're happy to facilitate that and make connections in order to help safeguard your company. So with that, thanks again to everybody, and we look forward to seeing everyone next time.